Cool.
I think we're on basically other sides of the planet. So
Yeah. I'm in Amsterdam. So most of the attendees, where are they generally based?
basically other sides of the planet. So
yeah. Cool.
Yeah. All right, cool. We are live on YouTube now as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce David T from Aave. He's going to be go over 101 for devs for the Aave platform. And I'm going to stop my video and let David take over. It's all you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Hey, everyone. That's right. It's been my pleasure. And it's good to be here. And thanks, everyone, for attending this webinar or workshop. So I'm just looking at the answers. So I'll answer that question, how to access the recording. I think the recording will be on YouTube, but Patrick will probably send a message about that later on.
Yep. Yeah, it's all going to be on YouTube afterwards. We're streaming live on YouTube right now as well. So
yeah. So yeah, this will be try and make it an interactive workshop. So yeah, feel free to post your questions in the Zoom Q&A, and I'll answer them as we go along. If I'll answer it soon, I'll just say that, and then we'll leave that question for later. So this workshop is mainly for developers to give a general introduction over Aave. And I think I went over some of this stuff in the little video that we did yesterday for the open ceremony, announcing the prizes, but I'll go through the same similar things anyway, for those that don't know. So yeah, my name's David. I'm a developer. You can find me on Twitter, Telegram, and all that under the name David T. All right, so for those that don't know, Aave is a money market lending protocol. So what that means is that on one side we have the depositors and they can deposit certain assets into the Aave protocol, which is a smart contract, and then immediately they start earning interest based on various parameters. And then on the other side we have borrowers. So borrowers can easily borrow certain assets from the Aave protocol, from that same pool of funds, and then they can repay it back whenever they want, and they can choose whether they have a stable or variable interest rate. And I'll go through each of these things in more detail, but this is just a general overview. So another special thing about the Aave protocol is we have our main markets, but then also we have multiple markets as well. So one of the second markets that we released was a Uniswap market. So what this enabled was it enabled LPs of Uniswap, so people that have provided liquidity to Uniswap and they had these LP tokens, they were able to use those LP tokens as collateral to borrow more assets like stablecoins in the Uniswap market. So that's quite a powerful thing that can happen as well. So the main protocol features, as I've already mentioned some of them, but the main ones are the earning or depositing side. So when you deposit and you receive these A tokens, and I'll go through each point here actually in this presentation, but these are the main protocol features. We have currently more than 20 different assets for depositors to deposit or lenders to borrow, and also we have the multi markets, like I mentioned. So Uniswap. The Uniswap market has the LP tokens and other assets as well, and we'll be releasing more markets very soon. We announced that we would release a set protocol market, and there's many more markets in the works as well. So yeah, so keep the questions coming. That's good. So the first, I'll just go back. So we do have a testnet. Well, we have it on Ropsten and Kovan, and at the end of this presentation, I'll have some links. But if you're curious, you can go to docs.aave.com/developers, and then that's all our developer documentation, which will have links to the Ropsten and Kovan testnet addresses. Okay, so for earning, let me just tick off these questions. I don't understand why. Yes, I'll go through the stable variable interest rate stuff a bit later.
Jason, why don't you go?
Cool. Yeah, I'm green.
Oh, that was Patrick. Okay. Yeah. So keep your questions coming, and I'll go through this, and I'll revisit the questions every now and again. so I don't get too interrupted. Okay, so for the earning part, so if I was explaining it to a 5-year-old, I say that we let others borrow your money when you're not using it. If I was explaining to a 15-year-old, I'd say that you can deposit your money and you earn immediate interest on that amount, and you can withdraw it at any time. If I was explaining to a DeFi person, what actually happens is that we tokenize your deposit. We give you A tokens in return, so it's 1-to-1. If you deposit 100 DAI, you'll get 100 A DAI in return. And the account holding those A tokens accrue interest based on protocol parameters and demand, and they accrue interest immediately, which is quite special. So as a developer, if you're wanting to deposit ERC20 tokens or one of the supported assets into the Aave protocol, this is an example of a Solidity contract. As I mentioned on our documentation, it's very detailed, and we also have Web3 like JS, JavaScript examples as well. But the main part that you as developers care about is probably the last line here, which says lending pool.deposit. And it's so super simple. So essentially, once you set up some of the parameters, you just say, hey, lending pool, I want to deposit this asset, which is DAI, this amount, and you put a referral code. So we also have a referral program, which I can go through a bit later, but that's maybe later on when you reach mainnet and you have some more users. But with a referral program, you're able to essentially make some origination fees from people that use your service and deposit or borrow from Aave. I mentioned that the A tokens, once you deposit, you earn interest immediately. That interest doesn't have to go to the person that deposited. They can also redirect that interest. So for example, some people created use cases where they donate that interest stream to charity or to their favorite influencer on Twitter or something like that. So there's many different use cases you can do there as well with redirecting interest. The next aspect is borrowing. So for borrowing, if I was explaining it to a 5-year-old, I'd say that you can borrow money whenever you need it. For a 15-year-old, I'd say that you borrow money depending on how much you have deposited in the system, and you can pay it back anytime, which is quite different from traditional banking. And if I was explaining it to a DeFi person, I'd say that you can use your A tokens as collateral to borrow supported assets that we have in our markets at either a stable or variable interest rate. So just quickly on that, because we had a question around stable rates. Is there a time limit on stable borrow? So for those that don't know, the variable interest rate fluctuates and changes based on certain parameters in the system. So that could be utilization, how much in demand that asset currently is. All these parameters are transparent. You can find them in our code, and we have some Medium blog posts about this as well. For the stable rate, it's less volatile than the variable rate, and you can essentially lock in a stable rate. So the question about, is there a time limit on stable borrowing? Technically, there isn't. You can have a stable borrow for a very long time, as long as you want. However, there's a certain situation where if your stable borrow rate is too far different from the current rate, you may get what do we call it? Your stable rate may get readjusted to the new environment. But we have this on our blog as well. We explain this, and that should be a very rare circumstance. So I think in most cases, probably 95% of cases or 99% of cases, you'll be able to essentially lock in your stable rate and have that open indefinitely. Let me just go through these other questions as well. If you deposit any asset in Aave, do you earn interest on that deposit? Yes, I already answered that question from Shane. You do earn interest on your deposit straight away. There are liquidations, which I can go through a bit later as well. Seb, maybe you're asking too many general questions, but we can go through them later on. Okay, I think that's good for now. So as a developer, if you're borrowing, so what you do is firstly you deposit tokens into the Aave protocol, and then that means you have some sort of collateral in the system, and then now you can borrow tokens using that collateral. So as before, the important line is the one at the bottom, lending pool.borrow. So you're calling our lending pool, you're saying borrow, I want to borrow this asset, in this case DAI, for a certain amount. You can choose whether you want a variable or stable interest rate, and then also you can include your referral code as well. So from a Solidity or Web3.js perspective, it's rather simple to implement these things. And then as I mentioned as well, switching between variable interest rate and the stable rate is also very simple. You just call the swap borrow rate mode on the lending pool for whatever asset that you want to swap into, that you want to swap the interest rate for, and it will swap. So it just takes one method call, super easy. So the next feature we have is flash loans as well. So flash loans can be a bit hard to understand initially, but I'll try and explain and have a few examples so you can hopefully all understand it. So if I was explaining to a 5-year-old, I say that it's free money, you have to pay back nearly immediately. If I was explaining to a 15-year-old, I'd say that anyone can borrow as much as they want, as long as they pay it back within a certain time frame. And because we get a lot of questions from Wall Street or banker types, if I was explaining to a banker, I'd say that it's an unsecured fixed term loan for about 15 seconds. That's a block time in Ethereum with a very low fixed interest rate of currently 0.09% on the amount that you flash loaned. That the bank in this case is, let's say, the Aave protocol or the Ethereum virtual machine. It can always collect at expiry, so there's no risk for the bank in this circumstance. And on a more technical sense, for the DeFi crowd, it's an uncollateralized loan. So you don't need to provide any collateral. Anyone can call the flash loan, supplied by our lending pool, where the amount borrowed plus a small fee needs to be repaid by the end of the transaction. And why someone would do this is because when they call the flash loan, they're also able to execute certain, basically any code that they want to execute during that transaction. And then as long as they repay back the flash loan at the end of the transaction, everything is good. If they don't manage to repay back the loan for whatever reason, then the transaction just reverts and it's like nothing ever happened. So it's quite magical in that sense, and there's no real world analogy to this. It's something very specific to DeFi and the blockchain space. So going through an actual example of a flash loan, if we start in the where the start icon is. If a borrower, let's say a borrower, which would have to be a smart contract, calls the flash loan function in the Aave protocol, and it says, I want to flash loan this amount of DAI, the Aave protocol would send that DAI to the borrower or to the smart contract, and then the borrower or the smart contract would be able to do whatever they want with that DAI. So in this case, they have the DAI, this is an example, they use that DAI to pay back a debt in a CDP, let's say a MakerDAO vault. They pay back that debt, which liquidate, and they end up liquidating their vault. So now they have ETH, the ETH collateral, and then with that ETH collateral, they can sell that on a decentralized exchange to ETH. So then they end up paying back the initial DAI debt. Then if there's any profit or any money left over, they can send that to someone else or send that to themselves or do whatever they want with it. From the perspective of the Aave protocol, all we care about, or all the protocol cares about, is that has the fee been paid and has the initial flash loan been repaid. So if you're planning to implement or play with flash loans, it's a bit more involved than the previous functions with depositing and borrowing. So initially, you have to create your own smart contract, and your smart contract would have a function, say like a flash loan function, and it would call the flash loan function also on our lending pool, and it would say flash loan to this contract or to this address a certain asset. So it could be DAI or MKR or whatever asset you want, a certain amount. This can be any amount as long as there's available liquidity. So you can flash loan $1 million, $10 million, however much you want. And you can also provide some data, some bytes data here. So that will be passed back to your contract later on. Once you've done this, our lending pool will do some sanity checks, making sure that that asset exists and the amount, there's enough of that amount in the lending pool. If the sanity checks pass, and then we call back, our lending pool calls back to your contract and it calls the execute operation function. So this is essentially how our lending pool passes control back to your smart contract, and it provides the relevant parameters. And then it's up to your smart contract in this section here to do whatever it needs to do. So, you know, some people, they would, like the previous example, they would close the CDP, pay back the debt, and then sell something on the decentralized exchange. If you're doing arbitrage opportunities, you know, you'd do your arbitrage here, and then before the end of transaction, you'd this last line at the bottom, you would essentially repay back the debt. So transfer those funds plus the fee back to the lending pool. All right, so the example that I had before over here, this was actually collateral swap. So a side project I had that actually did exactly this using flash loans. So here you can see that the collateral swap contract, you know, calls gets the flash loan from the Aave lending pool. It receives, you know, 1,700 DAI. It ends up paying back the debt of the MakerDAO vault. It receives that underlying collateral. It ends up selling some of that collateral to USDC, and it swaps it into a different MakerDAO vault. So that's something you can do with flash loans, interacting between different protocols, which is quite powerful. Another example of using flash loans, this is someone that did a small arbitrage on a decentralized exchange where they, you know, basically buy something cheap and sell it for higher on a different decentralized exchange. Here they, you know, they didn't make much profit, but they because they the opportunity was 33 DAI and they made about 3 cents, which is pretty good free money for them essentially. And you can see here they repaid back the loan here, and then they receive the profit back to their contract. Okay, before I go into Avenger Fan, let's just go through some of these questions that haven't been answered. So Shane's top question: if you deposit any asset on Aave, do you earn interest on that deposit, and what are the risks? So if you deposit any asset on Aave, yeah, so as I mentioned, you do earn interest straight away. And what are the risks? The risks are, you know, standard sort of risks, protocol risks, and things like that. We have been audited 3-4 times. You know, we have more than $1.5 billion of total value locked in the protocol. So it's pretty battle tested. I'd say among, you know, among the top DeFi projects, we're one of the top projects. We haven't had any compromises yet as well. So I think we're pretty safe. But of course, like any of these, you know, crazy DeFi products, there's always maybe a small risk that you need to take into account. Is there any liquidations? Yes, so there are liquidations, and you can create liquidator bots as well. We have that documentation on our developer docs. I won't go through it in this presentation, but essentially every user position has what we call a health factor. And if that health factor goes below 1, then anyone can liquidate that position, and they liquidate it by repaying back your debt. Then they receive your collateral, they receive a discounted amount of your collateral, and that incentivizes liquidators to keep the system healthy and things like that. So, but there's more details on the on our developer docs. Okay, what do you think is the safest wallet to use? So Seb, I'll skip over some of your questions because they're just way too general, not really good for this workshop. Could you publish a PDF version of the slides afterwards? Yeah, Adam, I'll give a link to the slides or PDF or whatever to Patrick, and Patrick will distribute the slides probably through whatever means necessary. Andrew asks, A tokens means what? Which tokens? So A tokens are, as I mentioned, when you deposit assets into Aave, the Aave protocol, you will receive a tokenized version of your deposit, which we call A tokens, Aave tokens. So they represent how much you deposited into the system. Anonymous attendee asks, if the market size supply is equal to the total borrowed, can a supplier with a sizable deposit still withdraw from that assets market? Not sure I understand the question, anonymous attendee, but Essentially, if so, the protocol, at the moment we have 1.5 or around $1.5 billion within the protocol. So if all of those funds are being loaned out, and then of course that means there's no liquidity there for the depositors to withdraw their funds, right? But the benefit for the depositors at that stage, if there's no liquidity, is they have a massive interest rate. So they're earning a ton of interest, and we see that on some assets at the moment where you could earn upwards of 30, 50, 60% APY on your deposits, which is pretty crazy. So there's that.
Cool.
Okay. Okay. A question from Jivan Jot. Is there no time limit? Then will the collateral be used by other borrowers? Yeah. So when you deposit funds into the Aave protocol, you deposit and you earn interest, and those funds are added to a pool, a lending pool. And on the other side, borrowers will borrow those funds and use it for whatever reason, for whatever they need to use it for, as I've explained already. Lenders be able to unlock their tokens. And as I also mentioned, so lenders or the people that deposit, they will be able to withdraw their funds whenever they want, as long as there's liquidity in there. Keeping in mind that there's billions or more than $1 billion of funds already in the protocol, so there's plenty of liquidity there. Shane's question: is there a risk when you deposit and do not take a loan? I mean, so these questions are like general DeFi questions, and I think I've already answered them. But you can do that. You can deposit and just earn interest without taking a loan. You don't have to take a loan if you don't want to. Brahma asks, in case of flash loans, since one does not need collateral, what compels one to pay back the loan? As I mentioned, Brahma, the EVM and the way the EVM works is that it enforces that the loan is paid back. And if it's not paid back, then the transaction reverts and it's like nothing happened. Horatio asks, what is needed to list A tokens in Aave? How do you choose them? So this is more a question for our risk and compliance team, but we have a risk and compliance team, and soon it will be part of the governance process, where we have a governance forum as well, where you can, let's say, make proposals, and then the proposals to the risk team, and the risk and compliance team will look at it, whether it's appropriate to list those assets. How is the borrow rate decided for new pools? So the borrow rate is essentially decided through various parameters in the protocol. So that includes utilization rate and things like that. For the base rate, you can look on our docs, docs.aave.com/risk. So our risk team has also created really detailed documentation of the whole risk process and how they evaluate assets. And in those, you'll see some of the parameters as well. So those parameters also influence the borrow rates. What is the difference between compound and Aave? So that's a good question. Hopefully I've already covered some of that stuff, but the main difference between Aave and various other lending protocols is that, like I mentioned, we have A tokens, they're one-to-one pegged with the underlying asset. We have flash loans. I didn't manage to go through credit delegation, but we have that as well. We're a very different type of protocol for many reasons, but I can maybe go into more detail on that later, but yeah, it's not really relevant for this workshop. Do you see Uniswap as your replacement? No, we don't see Uniswap as our replacement. It's a very different business, and we're not a decentralized exchange. Okay, so moving on for the developers that are attending and watching. So what I mean by Avenger Fam is, so I went over the main protocol features, and then now I'll go over some of examples of what other people have built that are also very cool, and that to sort of give you an idea of what can be built. So a good example is DeFiSaver.com. So what they allow is they use flash loans underneath their protocol, but they allow you to move your positions very quickly with a click of a button in one transaction between different lending protocols. So this helps users, receive the best interest rate or things like that, or they can. It just makes things a lot easier for the user, and we really support that. Because sometimes the interest rate is more favorable in Aave, sometimes it's not, and we really love things that help you, the end user, essentially become have safer loans. Another example is Furo Combo app. So I mentioned flash loans are very much for developers because you need to make a smart contract. Furo Combo created an app, a website where you can essentially create your own flash loans without writing any code, and you essentially connect these Lego blocks together, and then what they do is quite magical. But this is pretty cool because it allows non-technical people to take those arbitrage opportunities or experiment with flash loans without actually having to code. And so this is a really cool project, something that has Aave within it, but they have many other protocols included in the app as well. Another part of the Aave fam is Yearn Finance. So Yearn Finance essentially are a yield aggregator, and some of that those funds that are deposited come into Aave. So the point here is that Yearn Finance is a separate business. They're very successful now and they're doing awesome stuff. And they just use Aave as essentially to deposit funds and earn interest. And we love that because we love when people build on top of us, and they can build their own entire business and own community that's totally separate from Aave. And then another one that isn't necessarily in the DeFi space that's coming soon is Aave Gotchi. So there's a whole separate team as well, and they're creating something sort of like CryptoKitties, like an NFT that you can play with and go on quests, and like a game essentially, but they're provably rare. And underlying these NFTs are A tokens. So you'll have this NFT where it's interest bearing, and the longer you have the NFT and you go on quests and things like that, it's earning interest at the same time. So that's a really cool use case that we never thought of, that utilizes some underlying Aave protocol features, but they can create their own business and their own product out of it. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of resources. So the first thing for this Chainlink Hackathon, I'd recommend to go on our hack docs. So that will detail some of our expectations and what we would like to see from hackers and from teams building in the space. We've been part of a lot of hackathons, and we love to see great products built. You can also join our Discord or ping me or one of the team members on the Chainlink Discord, because we're there as well. We have our developer docs, our Medium, which has quite a few articles as well. If you're interested in learning more about the interest rate, stable rates, there's a good article there. Then of course Twitter and things like that. The Aavenomics and Aave V2, not really relevant for this specific call, but since this hackathon goes for nearly a month, it may become relevant depending on what gets deployed. But I think it would be interesting to see some things that are implementing or play around with the Aavenomics, which is partly our governance token. We'll have a migration from Lend token to Aave, and then you can use both Lend and Aave to vote in certain governance mechanisms. So we're going towards a path of decentralization. So I'd love to see some stuff there. Then Aave V2 as well. You can read that blog post about the details, but it'll be also fascinating if people come up with some ideas around what to build there. Having said that, Aave V2 is there's no code or interfaces or things like that out in public yet. Yeah, probably best to start building on V1 first. So that's before finish off the presentation and we answer more questions. In case you don't know, the prizes for this hackathon is that we have two prizes of 2,500 AUSDC. So that means it's Aave, the A tokens, it's interest bearing, so it's a bit more than 2,500 now. And we're looking for the best integration of Aave and Chainlink. And Aave is already deeply integrated with Chainlink. We use them as a price oracle for all our assets. So we're expecting or hoping that we see some other things that use Chainlink. So for example, in another hackathon, someone built something that used Chainlink's VRF, and also Chainlink alarm clock, and mashed up into some product that also utilize Aave. So would love to see just interesting things around that area. You don't have to use exclusively Aave and exclusively Chainlink. You can do Chainlink and Aave and 5 other protocols if you want. We just love to see cool stuff, and hopefully you can join and become part of the Aave fam. All right, let's go through these last questions, and then keep posting your questions as well, because I'll go through them, and then I'm basically nearly finished with my content. So Brahmas asked, does Aave issue a statement for money gain or loss for tax purpose, filing purposes? No, we don't. We're a decentralized protocol and everything's on the blockchain. So yeah, you'll have to maybe talk to your own accountant around that sort of stuff. Shane asks, I see at the moment there's no API on Lend. Why would that be? So I think, I mean, because I'm not part of the risk team, but I think that was partly due to the upcoming migration from Lend to Aave token. So we didn't want Lend token to be locked in as collateral, but that should be happening very soon. Anonymous attendee asked, do you see regulations coming for you? No, not specifically. As I mentioned, Aave is a decentralized protocol. We do have Aave Limited, which we recently announced has a banking license in the UK, or an EMI license. So we are, Aave Limited is a regulated institution, or a regulated company with the license. So we will have some regulated things as Aave Limited, which is a separate company from the protocol later on. Is it possible to create a retail bank on top of Aave? Well, yeah, I just mentioned Aave Limited. So we haven't announced any details of what Aave Limited will exactly do, but it does have a banking license. So that sort of stuff is possible. Yeah. All right. If there's no more questions that people have, I'd love to hear some developer questions as well. If people have developer specific questions, that would be good. Grant asks, is there community assets for us to use? What do you mean by community assets, Grant? Can you elaborate on that a bit? Images. Yes. I mean, if you go to marketing stuff, yeah, so there's definitely Aave marketing stuff. If you go to the aave.com website, let me just see here. So go aave.com, then you click the menu, then you go to branding. So our designer put all the branding, there's a media kit and everything here with A tokens kit. So that's all the branding marketing stuff there that you can download and use as you need. Okay. Brahma also asked, is it easy to withdraw money from Aave after I deposited the money? Yes, it is easy. You can either use our front end, the app.aave.com, or since this is a developer workshop, you can easily write code to withdraw that money. Here there is an attempt to bring mortgages on Aave. Would you speak on that? Good question, Shane. Yes, so it's more than an attempt. So we've announced that we're working with RealT, who have already tokenized real estate on the blockchain. And I mentioned that we have multiple markets, so the Aave main market and the Uniswap market. And we will eventually have something around RealT, which will most likely be sort of a private RealT market, just because RealT, they deal with KYC and things like that. So only KYC people will be able to interact with that market. But essentially what will happen is those people will be able to use their RealT tokenized real estate and use it as collateral to take out loans and interact within a DeFi space as well. Brendan asks, I'm considering forking Aave for an insurance protocol in this hackathon. Is that a use case that your team has considered? So firstly, I don't know if we'd support a fork of Aave. If you're talking fork, sort of like SushiSwap type fork, I don't know if we'd turn a blind eye to that or not really like it. But if we haven't really looked into insurance, from our perspective, Aave protocol is, we're like a base DeFi layer. We just provide really cool lending and borrowing experiences and make that easier, especially in V2. We'll make it easier to swap between debt positions and things like that. And everything else on top, like insurance products, options, protocols, all that stuff goes on top. So that's for other people to build. So we have, there's already teams building like options products that are based on top of Aave. It's similar to Yearn Finance, right? They've built sort of their product on top, in a way, on top of Aave and Compound and these other products as well. So I'd encourage you to build whatever you want to build. With forking, that's a bit of a sensitive topic around these times. I don't think you should fork, especially if you're building an insurance protocol, because I imagine you need a lot of funds for that insurance liquidity. Horatio asks, can we use credit delegation? Is it available? Good question. It is available, and we do have documentation. I didn't go through it in this presentation. I forgot to. But if you can see my screen in the docs, I'm not sure if you can. There is a credit delegation section. If you go to docs.aave.com/developers, then you click on the protocol and you click on credit delegation. There's a credit delegation section. This section was written with the example, the mainnet example that we had, or the mainnet credit delegation that happened with Diversify. They use an open law smart contract, but you don't have to use an open law smart contract. You can use whatever. You don't need the contract if you don't want. As an example, Yearn Finance have their link, or I think one of their Vault products uses credit delegation. So it's live on mainnet. You can use that. The documentation should be all here. It should be enough for you to get started at least. Horatio, that's a good question. Mork asks, how do we encode data for chain transaction to other contracts? This is sent in the data field. To example, the flash line. So when you encode data, there's standard encoding in Solidity or on the EVM that's used. Both all these Web3 libraries and Solidity has a specific ABI.encode function, and that's how you would encode it. And then on the other end, you'd need to decode it into whatever parameters you need. So you don't need any extra tools for it. It's just part of the language. Does Aave, anonymous attendee asks, does Aave utilize the graph? And if so, is there an official subgraph? Yes and yes. So we love the graph. It's really useful. And once again, on the documentation, so docs.aave.com/developers, there is a analyzing GraphQL data section. And in this analyzing GraphQL data section, you can find all the details you need, including our subgraphs, which are on mainnet, Ropsten, and Kovan, and also examples of how to use a subgraph. So yeah, that's definitely, some people prefer using graph. Okay, looking through some more questions. Brendan says, I shouldn't fork, but I might be able to use the Aave protocol API. So the Aave protocol is a decentralized permissionless protocol, etc., etc. So you can build whatever you want on top of it. You don't have to ask our permission to build anything you want. The bigger problem for something like an insurance protocol is getting users to trust what you've built. But yeah, you can build essentially whatever you want on top of Aave. Horatio, another question asks if we use DCO from Chainlink or similar to categorize from external. I'm not sure what DECO from Chainlink is. I don't know if Patrick knows, or maybe Horatio, if you explain that again. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what that is. I'm not. Yeah, maybe post your question again if you explain what DECO is. Mork asks, still don't understand the data encoding answer. Different onward contracts will have different parameters, etc. How does Aave know how to forward these? No, so for the flash loan function specifically, let's go back to this presentation. Here, so here on the last line, you're passing in flash loan data, right? So that's data that you've already encoded, right? So here I do empty data, but you could call ABI.encode and you can encode some addresses or encode some numbers or encode whatever text strings that you want. And then this data is packed into like bytes. And then that bytes is just passed into the flash loan function. And then when our lending pool calls back to your contract, it will pass that bytes data as the params here. So it's up to you to unpack those params or decode them. So that's only in this flash loan example. So of course, there's no automatic passing along of encoded data. The function has to specifically have a parameter that accepts bytes data and passes that along. Jivanjot asks, is Aavonomics is like Aragon DAO? No, not quite. So Aavonomics is what we call, it's essentially our new tokenomics. It's about the new Aave token and how we will move towards decentralization of the protocol. So that's essentially what it is. So very different from the DAO. And there'll be proposals and people can vote on proposals and decide what happens with the protocol. So that's what it is. I'll leave these resources here so you can visit them if you want. Crypto Science asks, how would you suggest creating trust in an insurance product as an on-ramp? I'm not sure on that one. It's not really my area of expertise of creating trust in an insurance product. I mean, in these days in the DeFi space, it's about not necessarily creating everything from scratch. So for protocols like Aave, where we have more than $1 billion of value locked, it's trusted by a lot of people to deposit that much money into the protocol. And using protocols like Aave, which are trusted in a DeFi space, I think that will help you build more trust. Whereas if you build something from scratch, you can have a hard time gaining trust because those aren't battle tested. Grant asks, using DECO for validation would still count as integration with Aave if Aave is included. I still have no idea what DECO is, but if it interacts with, if it's using a chain link feature and it interacts with Aave in some novel way, then yeah, that could count as an integration. Check out the hack docs that is on the screen right now, docs.aave.com/hack, and yeah, read through those docs because I detail sort of some of the things that would like to see. So what wouldn't be included is that if you did chain link and then you had something where someone could deposit funds into Aave, but those things are totally separate, because depositing into Aave is really just one line of code. It's not really what we'd expect from a 1-month hackathon project. Okay. Tijelva asks, is there functionality to call the redeem function of an A token and have it withdraw as much as possible whilst maintaining a health factor of -1, or is that something that needs to be calculated manually? So the short answer is there's not a function that does that, but you could easily write a function that does that. You'd have to calculate it yourself because the health factor is calculated dynamically. There is a function, I forgot what it's called, but it's like is redeemable or something like that, where you can call it and it will return whether you can withdraw that amount. But yeah, any sort of those sort of calculations, withdrawing the exact amount to keep your half-life, to keep your health factor above 1, would have to be done on your end. Keeping in mind that you don't want to have it just above 1. You probably want to have it like at least 1.5 to 3 health factor. That's probably a lot safer. Let me call back. Jivanjot asks, can you please refer some examples of smart contract or flash loans that use some swapping indexes? There's some out there. Actually, if you go to our documentation, we have some tutorials around flash loans, but it doesn't go through the dexes in particular. If you wanted to code that, it shouldn't be that hard. You should be able to use Google and find some examples on GitHub. They're out there. So Horatio, DCO is a 3-part handshake where by ZKP provide oracles confidential like bank balances. So use this info via smart contract or open line and use this by Aave and use it as collateral. Interesting idea, Horatio. Thanks for explaining what DECO is. Trustless authentication, Grant says. So for Horatio and Grant, this DECO stuff sounds interesting. If you're using like ZK proofs, that would be awesome. Because one of the things is, with credit delegation, I'd see there'll be an opportunity there. Because at the moment, with the mainnet example of Diversify doing the first credit delegation, that worked because there was an open law contract, and essentially the two parties knew each other, and they could essentially trust each other. Because the way credit delegation works is that the person that deposits money into the protocol, they delegate their credit line to someone else. So they're trusting someone else can just withdraw however much they're allowed to withdraw. And then it's up to the person that deposited to make sure that loan gets repaid, and they charge whatever interest they want as well. So it would be interesting if there was something around that helped credit delegation become easier. Maybe if I could give a ZK proof that I was able to pay back this loan, or that I'm a real person, or that I've been KYC'd over here, or that my company or my wallet has at least this amount of money. That might be interesting for credit delegation specifically. So yeah, I think that would definitely qualify as an interesting use case, as you'll be building out credit you'll be using the credit delegation vaults, and your contracts won't be a simple deposit function. It'll be quite involved, which would be cool. Actually, the more I think about that, I'd like to see something like that. That'd be really cool. All right. Anonymous attendee says, does lending and interest rate stuff work on Ringfee? No, the interest rate stuff doesn't work on Ringfee. It's only on Kovan and Ropsten at the moment. AIL, are you leveraging ERC 1155 token standard for the NFT spinoff? So to be clear, Aave Gotchi is not our product. It's a totally separate team. So it's not ours. It's not a spin-off of ours. I'm not sure on exactly what NFT standard they're using, but I assume they're probably using whatever standard is common in the industry now. Anonymous attendee asks, how are you able to offer high interest rates on lending compared to normal banks? So the way we don't really, the Aave protocol, we don't choose what necessarily the interest rates. The interest rates are, for the most part, determined by utilization and parameters in the protocol. So we set risk parameters and say, this is safe risk parameters for certain assets in the protocol. But then the interest rate is really determined by how much people want to borrow that asset and how much of that asset is being deposited. And it's decentralized. Anyone can deposit and borrow. I think all this activity, this is for DeFi in general. I think that's why you see a lot more competitive interest rates in DeFi than banks, right? Banks have a monopoly. They can charge whatever they want to charge. Whereas, in DeFi space, it's all open, decentralized. There's a lot of competition. So yeah, okay. Prince asks, how does Aave calculate interest rates for off-chain calculations? Does Aave use Chainlink Oracle? So for this, so as I mentioned, so interest rates, you can look through the code, and the code is quite detailed. The interest rates are calculated for the most part on chain. There is a base rate calculation for stable rates only. That's calculated off chain, and that rarely changes. But for the variable interest rates and for variable interest rates, that's calculated based on the utilization and certain parameters in the protocol. And then does All right. And we've answered 56 questions so far. If there's any other questions, feel free to post. Otherwise, Patrick, I think we're probably ready to finish up now. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds good. I think that you got them all, unless there you want to grab that last. Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Prince.
Awesome. Well,
all right.
David, thank you so much for jumping on. I think this was really helpful, and yeah, it sounds like a lot of engineers asked a lot of really good questions here. Yeah, thank you for demoing this workshop. If you guys have any more questions, David is actually very active in the Discord, in that Aave support channel. This video will be going up on YouTube, so if you want to rewatch it, you can go check it out there. And the hackathon continues on. So thank you so much, David.
That's right, my pleasure. Good luck, everyone. And yeah, make sure to check out our docs because they're quite elaborate. So just for that last question, we won't do a step-by-step code workshop, but yeah, there's a lot of code and stuff already out there, and we'll be on the support channels.
Awesome. All right, thank you guys.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.